Hi guys, welcome to Pixel Affair. It's Kobe here, and in today's video we are going to see how we will do this using Cinema 4D's Mograph and a couple of Deformers. Right, so this video was actually inspired by a video I saw on Instagram originally done by Legal. I think his proper name is Jan Legal, I think so. I don't know if I get the name right. Such like a wonderful work, and he has a lot of interesting stuff on his Instagram. You can later check them out. Right, so this is what I saw, and I think from the hashtags probably he used Houdini. That's what I'm thinking. But then I wanted to see how I'll do something like this with Cinema 4D, basic Mograph stuff and Deformers. So let's get into Cinema 4D and see how we will do this same effect using Cinema 4D's Mograph and stuff. So I'm in Cinema 4D, so let's quickly go ahead and create our object. So I'll come into my object and I'll create a sphere, right? I'll change the display to garage shading with lines so that you see the segments in here. So I'll come into the attributes and I'll change the type from standard to icosahedron. You can see it gives us this wall segmented triangles. I'll increase it like say 24, and then now it's triangle, but we want it to be a bit hexagonal and stuff. So to do that, I'll come into my deformers and I'll choose the bevel deformer, make it a child of the sphere, and I select the bevel deformer. Come to the attributes in here. You can see the component mode is set to edge. Let's change it from edge to points, and now you can see something is happening here. So I'll come down to the offset and I'll increase the offset, and you can see if we increase it like say 10, we have like some nice hexagonal looking sphere, right? So for now, let's assume we are good. What's left is that how do we extrude our hexagons, right? So to do that, we are going to use our Mo extrude. So I can simply come into my Mograph down here, and you can see the Mograph deformers. We have Mo extrude. I'll click on it to create a Mo extrude, and I'll make it a child of the sphere after the bevel deformer, and now you can see it's extruding our hexagons. I have actually a whole tutorial on here on YouTube talking and explaining into details how the Mo extrude works, which you can later check out after this video if you want to. So I'll select the Mo extrude and come down here, and you can see the transform mode is set to pair root. I explained all of this in that video, but I'll change it from root to pair step, right? And then I'll increase the extrusion steps to 3, right? So we are good. I'll still come into the transform, and you can see whilst it's extruding our hexagon, it's making them smaller. If I reduce them here, you can see it's making them smaller and everything, but I don't want that, so I'll set it back to 0, actually 1, right? So I'll set it all back to 1 by 1 so that it doesn't scale it down whilst it's extruding, right? Can even set so, and you can see it has actually moved it a bit up, so you can even reduce it, right? The scale a little bit, like say 2, the position, I mean the Z position, right? So now how do we get our extrude to be coming in using either follows or whatever you want to use? And that's because the Mo extrude, even though it's a deformer, but because it's a Mograph object, it can be affected by effectors, right? So I can select the Mo extrude, come into my Mograph, and in the effectors I'll choose plane. We can simply find it here as well though. So I'll drag and drop the plane down here, and I'll come into the attributes. You can see what's happening. I'll come into the attributes of the plane and come to the perimeter. The Y is set to 100. I'll set it to 0. And what we want to control is the Z. So if I select the Z and increase it to like say 13, you can see it now pushing it out again. We can even also, for instance, come in here and even affect the rotation. So if I select this, you can see what's doing. It can affect the rotation and give us some nice looking stuff, or this way, or even this way. I have a whole tutorial explaining this more, so you can later check it out. But for now, we don't want to affect the rotation based on what you are doing. But if you want, you can. Then in the scale, if you want to, you can also do the same thing. Use uniform scale, and you can see it scales it and gets it closer when it zooms out and all of that. right? But in this case, we probably might not. Let's actually leave the scale as well, or let's maybe see what we can do. Maybe a little bit of scaling when it comes out. Something like that will be fine. I don't think it's too. I think it's too much. So yeah, so we have our hexagonal sphere created and everything is done, right? So before we go ahead and create the our fields and everything to affect it, let's first of all go ahead and create these spheres, right? The spheres, these spheres, and the rings that passes around our object, and that's what you are going to. This same animation is what you are going to use to drive the movement of our hexagon, polygon or hexagons, right? So to do that, we can simply come in here and create another sphere, right? I'll move it on the side somewhere here, and now so that we see what we're doing, I'll make it like say 15, and the segment for this case it doesn't really matter like that because we are just going to render it like as a sphere. So with this selected, to get it to orbit around our main sphere, I'll name this main. So to get it to orbit around our main sphere, right, there are several ways you can do that. I can simply create a null object, right, which is in the middle of this main sphere, and I'll now make this sphere a child of the null object. So if I select the null object and start rotating it, you can see it's orbiting around our main sphere. I won't do that, and now I'll delete the null. What I want to use is a circle. So I'll come into my splines and I'll choose a circle, right? And this is what we are going to make our sphere follow this circle path, so that's what we are going to use to orbit our main sphere. So I'll make it a little bit bigger, maybe 225, and then this sphere, I can actually create. I'll create a null object, right? A null object, and I'll make this sphere a child of the null object. I'll call the null object maybe 1. I'll just name the null object 1, and then make sure this sphere is selected, reset its coordinates so that it's in the center of everything is the same position as the null object 1, and then I'll right click on the null object, come to animation tags, and I'll choose align to spline, right? The align to spline, I'll come down here, the spline path, I'll drag in and drop in this circle, and I can see we have our circle, our sphere on the circle. So if I select the position of the align to spline and move it, you can see it orbits around our sphere. So you can go ahead and set a keyframe. So at frame 0, I'll set a keyframe at the position, and at frame 90, I'll increase the keyframe to like 100, the position to like 100. And now if I hit play, you can see it moves and it orbits perfectly, but it eases in and out. So what I want to do is I'll click on this icon here to bring our timeline, which we can also come here and find it in the timeline dope sheet, and I'll select my align to spline. First of all, I'll come here and you see set to spline mode. We'll change it from spline to linear so that our animation will be constant and linear throughout, right? After that, because it's going 360, right, we want to repeat the animation. So when it ends, we want it to repeat again. So we come down, make the align to spline selected, come to the attributes. You can see you have before and after. We'll change them to repeat, right? And now, even if we increase our frames to like whatever frames, let's set it to like 270, right? Even though our animation ends here, but still you can see it continues and continues like that. So that's what we want. Now we can go ahead and hide this circle, and now another thing is I'll create another null object and make the circle and this one all a child of the null object, right? And I'll call this null object orbit 1. So I can simply select this null object, and now depending on how I want my listing to orbit, I can just move it and all of that to get it to orbit the way I want it. All right, so now we have orbit 1. So this same object, now hold control, click and drag, and then I will, in fact, so now that we've created the orbit 1, before we do the second one, we can go ahead and create our effector or effector to affect our plane. So now I come into my plane effector, come to the fields, and I'll create a spherical field, right? And you can see if I select my spherical field and take the move to move it somewhere here, you can see what's happening, the way it's affecting our hexagonal shapes, right? So we want it to follow the movement of this particular sphere orbiting. So all we have to do is to take it out of the plane effector, come into our main the orbit here, the null object, and I'll drag and drop this spherical field into the one here, right? I'll reset its coordinates, so I'll reset everything, and now you can see our effector follows the animation, but then it's not affecting our plane effector or our hexagon, so you have to make it bigger. So I'll increase the size and maybe even increase the inner radius. All right, so the size, let's see, I'll come into the field, I'll make the size like 170. I think 170 is fine. So you can see it's affecting our object, right? So this is our orbit 1. So I'll come in here, and the orbit 1 maybe, I think, let me bring the circle so that I see what I'm doing. So I'll select the orbit 1 null, and I'll adjust it a little bit like this. So I want it to look something like that, depending on how you want it. So I'll make it like that, and then the orbit 2. After that, now you can hold control and click on the orbit 1, click and drag to create another copy. I'll name that one orbit 2, right? And in the null inside, I'll name that null 2, right? So that we see the difference. And now if I select this orbit 2 and probably rotate it somewhere like this, you can see, can actually select it and maybe move it back, something like that. Can play around with it so you get what you think is right. So that's basically how I did it. But you can see this one, the effector, the plane effector here, the field is not affecting the plane effector. So I'll select the plane effector, come into the field once again, and now I'll drag and drop in this second spherical field in here, and now you can see that one is working, but then it's not, the other one, the first one, is not showing. So then I have to come into this the fields and make sure the blend mode is set to either max or add, right? And now the two of them will be working fine, right? Now the next thing is we have to add a little bit of how do you call it, bounciness, or like run a little bit of trail after everything has been moved. So we select, come into our object, the main sphere, the more extrude, and I'll come into my effectors and I'll choose delay, right? The delay effector. I'll set the mode, come to the parameters, I'll change effectors, change the mode to spring, and I'll probably increase it a little bit, like say 75, and now it should give us a little bit of bounciness and everything. You can go ahead and add another delay to it, select the more extrude, maybe add another delay to also smoothing the bounciness, or add another delay, and I'll leave it like at the blend so that it sort of smoothly smooths the springiness of the whole thing. But for now, let's delete this one. Later you can add it. So now we are almost through with the animation. So what's left is the rings that trails after this sphere when it's moving, right? So let's go ahead and create those rings, right? So to do that, we will use tracer object. So I'll select this sphere, either the sphere or even the null object. So I'll select the null object 1. I'll just select the null object 1, and I'll come to my Mograph and I'll choose tracer object. And you can see if I select the tracer, you can see the tracer link. The null object 1 has been added. You can simply, if it didn't, you can simply drag and drop it in here. And now I'll go ahead and hide my circle. Right, let me select the 2 circles and hide it. Right. So now, and let me change the display mode also to color shading with outline, so that even the filter. I don't like the work plane, so I'll take off the work plane. So now if I hit play, you can see there's this trail which is following our sphere, right? One, and it will continue like that. But I don't want it to continue forever. So what I'll do is that I'll select the tracer, come down to the limits, and I'll change it from none to from end, right? And I'll increase the amount of frames I want it to last to, like, say 10 frames. So now if I hit play, you can see it gives us this trail which follows our sphere, right? So we are going to create the ring, and the ring is just normal torus. So I'll come into my object and I'll create a torus. I'll push it somewhere on the side so that we see what you are doing. Select the torus and I'll make it say like maybe 12, and I'll reduce the pipe radius to, like, say 2. I think that's fine, right? And I'll okay, we are fine. So I'll create another torus. So this is the first one, and let's create a smaller one. So I'll select this one, even take the scale tool and make it as small as we want. So I'll scale it down a little bit more. So this one will be a smaller one and a big one. And let's go ahead and create a clonal object. Make these two torus a child of the clone, and select the clone. Change the mode from down here. The mode is set to grid. Let's change it to object. And then the clone is set to iterate. Let's set it to blend, right? Now the object we want to blend on is the tracer object. So what you have to do is, in the cloner, the object you want to clone on, we drag and drop in the tracer, and now you can see our tracer has been added. Now let's select the clone and the transform. Let's rotate it to, like, say 90. Is it here? 90. Yeah, 90 is fine, and we are cool. So now if I hit play, you can see it's following our sphere, right? We can also select the clones and increase the number of clones you want, maybe 15 if you want to, right? Or if you feel our trail is too long, we can also reduce the length of our trail or increase it if you feel it's too short, right? So from here going, you keep playing around with it to see what you get, right? So now that you've created this string tree, let's do the same thing for this one. So with that, all I'll do is that I'll select this tracer, click and drag it here. In fact, I'll delete this one first, and let's first of all select this clone and the tracer, right, the two of them, and group it in a null. So create a null object, select the two, hold Alt G to group it in a null, and I'll call this ring 1. And now let's hold Control to create another copy. And then in the tracer, we want to replace the null 1 with the null 2. So if I come to the orbit 2, you can see the null 2. I simply drag and drop it in here and delete, select this one and delete it. So now if we hit play, you can see it should create another one for this. Alright, and now we are on point. Everything is on course. Let's create a simple camera and come into our coordinates, reset the rotation and even the X, and let's adjust the camera somewhere here and zoom in closer like that. Be something like this, will be fine. So now basically we've created our scene. There's something which is left, and now let me get out of the camera, hide the camera, and now let's get close. You can see the edges of our main hexagonal object are too sharp and too, very, very sharp. So what we do is that we will use another bevel deformer to bevel the edges. So I'll come into my deformer, choose another bevel deformer, and I'll apply it after the more extrude, and now I can see instantly start beveling our edges. I'll come into the bevel deformer down here, and I'll increase the subdivisions to, like, maybe 3 will be fine, right? And if I change the display back to red lines, you can see it's giving us this sharp. You can increase the thickness if you want, but I think 1 is fine in this case. And also, if for instance maybe it's just the thickness, the top that we want to bevel, but you don't want to bevel the edges down here, we can simply increase the angle threshold to, like, say 80 something, and now you can see that these edges are not beveled, just the top ones. But in this case, I want to bevel every part, so we are cool with it. So now we are cool. But one thing is that the bevel, after adding it, it sort of slows down our scene. So if I hit play, you can see it's quite slow. So what I'll do is that I will disable the bevel and make sure my animation, everything is well set before I go ahead and then add the bevel. So now I'm convinced that I like my animation, everything is fine. I'll change the display back to without gauching, without lines, and check player animation, everything is fine. So the next step is, because I want to add the bevel to see everything, I'll enable the bevel, and what I'll do is I'll bake my whole animation into Alembic. So to do that, I'll select my main sphere, right click and come down here. You can see bake as Alembic, and I'll select that one. I'll just go ahead and hit enter, and it will bake my main sphere as Alembic, so that you can have proper playback with the bevel and everything in it. So let's wait till it bakes everything. So now it's done baking, and let's disable the old sphere, and I can see you have another one, main one, which is created down here. So if we hit play, this one will be faster and more interactive for us to play. But another thing is that you can see, because we are using the tracer here, it's still not interactive, especially for the ring and everything. It gives us this wrong looking like tracer of the rings, right? So we will have to bake how do you call it, the tracer too. So I'll select the tracer, this tracer. I'll come in here and I'll select this one as well. And now I have actually a tutorial on how to bake a tracer into splines if you want to. If also, you can check it here on YouTube later if you don't understand anything. But the same thing, we can bake it into as Alembic as well. So I can select the two selector. I can right click and come to down here, and I'll bake it as Alembic. Where is it? Right, go ahead and it should be quick to bake that one as well for us. So after those ones are baked, you can see it creates this. Let's see what we have. Let me select this spline and this spline. Let me go ahead and hide the tracer, this tracer, so that we see what we have. And now you can see it's created the Alembic for us, right? So all we have to do is now, in this clone, right, I'll come into the object, and the object we want to trace is there. We'll actually, instead of the tracer, we'll replace it with the this Alembic, the Alembic file. I'll replace it with this, and I'll come into the app here, this clone, I'll replace it with the same Alembic trace, and now this one should give us something stable, right? So you can see there's an issue. The issue is that now our rings are now, because the Alembic is proper stable spline which can be read, our splines are right now on the top. So to do that, we just select the clones, come down to the end here, and you can just adjust it to get it to where we want it to. All right, and now should be fine. But in this case, now if we go back, you can see everything plays smoothly, right? So now we are good. Also, to get it to loop, all we have to do is that, you see, because that animation starts like was from 0 to 90. So if we start from frame 90, that's 90, and frame 180, insert frame 180, I think we should get some nice looking loop. All right, frame 90 to 180, you can see everything loops smoothly with the blend and all of that. So that's basically how to set something like this up. All right, because our animation started from frame 0 and ended at frame 90. If we started from frame so basically at frame 90 it starts again, and at frame 180 it ends, and at frame 180 it starts again and adds at 270. So in the middle, from 90 to frame 180 should give you some nice loop. The reason why frame 0 might not work from frame 0 to 90 might not work is that you see there's the delay gives us some extra animations after when it starts from frame 0, which you wouldn't get at frame 0. It has to play a bit for you to get those animation that was added, secondary animation that was added by the delay effector. So at frame 0, those effects had not been added yet. So at frame 90, that was when all those effects has been added, and it continues to frame 180 and 270 and all of that. So that's why I wanted to start it rendering from frame 90 to 180. So now we are basically done. Now to add our lighting to it, all I did was to let me quickly show the lighting of our scene. Let me save this. I'll call it Tute, maybe Hex, and I'll save it. Right. So to add our lighting to it, all I did was to come into my I'll add just a dome light. I use redshift in this case, and then I'll add any object, like I'll click and add an HDRI, right? So I'll come in here and now add HDRI, which I showed something, any HDRI, which should be fine. Let me see which one. I mean, not this particular one. I'll actually come in here and then I'll clear. So basically I added HDRI. Let me go ahead and hide this for now. So the HDRI I added, I think was, let me actually show. In here, yeah, I think this HDRI from Grayscale Gorilla and Parks, and I think I just used the normal regular HDRI. No, I think yeah, it was just the first one that's in it. Right, if I enable it, you can see it's just some. Let me actually bring in my redshift render view. So if I actually enable it, I should see it in the view portal. But let me actually bring in my redshift render view, and we should see our HDRI in our scene. So it's just a normal like sky with some beachy looking HD image. I didn't want to go ahead and stress adding serious light, so it's just one HDRI that I basically used, and I think I didn't like the colors and the saturation, so I probably took it down to 0, and that's basically all the lights I added in the scene, nothing else. Right, the material, let me save it. The material, what I did was to, let me come in here and I'll come and create my material. All right, and I'll double click to bring the material node editor. Right, and I'll select the redshift, and I choose, I think this one, which one, like the copper material. Let's enable our inner view. Right, let's apply it to our Alembic file. And now I think I adjusted it a bit with the tints to like whatever color I wanted. And then the ring ones I created another material. Hold on, let me come in here, create new material, and I'll apply it to the ring, and the sphere as well. There's the sphere, so I'll apply it to the orbits, and I used the same custom preset here. I used the silver. All right, and now if I should hit play, it should be fine. Right, so that's basically how I actually lit my scene. It wasn't anything complex. Now the transition with the colors, right? So if I bring my picture viewer here, you can see, yeah, I adjusted the color of the tint of my copper. and you can see in here it's from blue to wherever the fall off is, the color changed and everything. Let me quickly show how I did that. But with this color, how I adjusted the color is that if I select the material, come down here into the material mode, you can see the color here. So I increase the redness and everything in it a little bit. You can see it's changing. I select this one and I increase the red. So that's basically how I made the color like that reddish copperish looking object. Now to get the transition from the copper looking color to that blue one, I use the plugin, right? If you are using Cinema 4D, I think 2023 and upwards, you should be able to add right click others and add vertex map straight to your object without making it editable. But ours insists downwards you can't do that. So what I did was that actually, let me quickly show that one as well. So I have Insidium X particles vertex map. So if I come to X particles vertex map, I have this XP vertex map, right? So I choose the XP vertex map, and then in the object I want to get its vertex map. If I bring my picture viewer somewhere here, as a matter of fact, let me make my picture viewers part of this. Yeah, so if I bring like the SP vertex map, I can simply drag and drop in this Alembic object in here, and I can see it gives me this vertex map of my Alembic object, right? And now in the SP vertex map, I can simply drag and drop in, like let me drag in one of these spheres. So I'll drag in this particular sphere, right? So this sphere, in fact, I can bring in the two spheres, right? And now with the two spheres in here, I can increase the range to, like, say, same thing we did with the fall of like 160. And you can see here it's affecting our object. So wherever it's yellow, I want it to show a different color, and wherever it's red, I want it to show the copper color. So to do that, you have to go back into the copper material. So I'll save this, open the copper material, and then in here we'll create, in the material, create another material, right? And you create a material blender, right? And now you can look for vertex attributes, right? So these are the two things you are going to use to control. So this is the main copper material, and this is the material blender. So in the material blender, I'll click and drag this main material, the copper one, into this blue field, and we will choose the base. Make sure you select the base color, right? And the new material that we've created, which is this one, I'll come into the base property and make it like blue, so that we see what's going on, right? And that one, I'll click and drag it, put it on the blue, and choose layer one color, right? And now we want to use the vertex map to tell it where it should show. So in the layer one color, I'll click and drag the vertex attribute on the blue. Now choose the layer one color blend. So I'll tell the layer one color blend to only show where the vertex map is yellow, right? Which is this part. So I've actually piped, but I've not connected the vertex map in here. So all I have to do is to select this vertex map, vertex attribute here. In the attribute name, I'll simply drag and drop in this vertex map source. And now if I hit render, it should be fine. In this case, it's not showing. I don't know why, but let's see. Oh, actually, what I've not done is I've not piped the material blender into the output. So now I'll select the material blender output into this one, and I'll connect it. And now you can see our blue is showing in, if I get out of the camera. And now can see now our blue is showing through wherever the sphere passes. So that's basically how I went about and set up this whole thing. It wasn't anything complicated, but it was actually fun to play around with it. I hope this was useful and you've learned something from this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.